I'm not breaking any news here when I tell you the 76ers have been snake-bitten. I know the Pelicans have lost more value to injury while the Grizzlies have lost more man games to injury. But the Paul George trade was supposed to finally put Joel Embiid's Sixers over the top, not have them languishing near the bottom of the league. But George and Embiid began the season on the shelf. 8 games into his return from a sprained left knee, PG suffered a bone bruise on the same knee, which sidelined him another 10 days. Meanwhile, Embiid's troublesome left knee kept him out till mid-November. And with Tyrese Maxey left to shoulder the brunt of minutes and the Sixers' offense, the star guard eventually saw his hamstring flare up, keeping him out for 2 weeks. It gets worse. 4 games into Embiid's return, knee swelling sidelined the big fella for an additional 2 weeks. Then 2 games into return number 2, Embiid suffered a sinus fracture. According to a 2020 study looking at a 34-year period, facial fractures occurred about once every 283 player seasons. Embiid has now suffered 3 in 9 seasons. Add it all up, and Philly's Big Three has logged just 45 minutes together over 3 games. One of the bright spots in this dark time was the offensive contribution of Jared McCain, the Rookie of the Year frontrunner through a third of the season. But now even McCain has been sidelined indefinitely by a torn meniscus. You know the injury bug has bit you bad when even the young guys who only get to shine due to teammate injuries are also now injured. Dyson Daniels joked that there must be something in the water in New Orleans causing all the Pelicans' bad injury luck. Maybe there's something in those Philly cheesesteaks too. And with that, welcome to the Unfiltered Show. My name is Joseph Casciaro. My guest today, Chicco Nacion. Chicco told me he was going to give me a slow clap for my monologue. He clearly was not impressed. He did not give that to me. Chicco, it's just you and me today. We had some schedule conflicts. We wanted to have Wolf on in here. Couldn't get him in today, so it's just you and I. You ready to roll?
Let's do it. Let's go.
Any thoughts before we get moving on to other subjects? I guess, what thoughts can you have? It sucks for Philly.
Yeah, first of all, the cheesesteak. Nicely done. Bravo.
Thanks.
Well done.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Back to the Sixers. Season from hell, man. It's hard to kind of fathom something like that happening. You mentioned about the stat with Joel Embiid and the facial fracture. You can do all the load management you want, but literally having your face broken
3 times in 9 seasons.
That's just absurd. And you mentioned bringing Paul George. They signed him basically to manage through Embiid's injuries. Now you have another star player with his own knee injury who's struggling to get through the regular season. And he's also got 3 years and $200 million on that contract. It's not great for the 76ers.
Yeah. And like I said, and then McCain too. It's like the one guy who Sixers fans will be like, well, this season's going into the dumpster. Maybe worst case, we end up unintentionally tanking. We do have draft capital. And then it's like, well, even the young guy that we were watching who was like the silver lining in all this, even if the season did go into the tank, now he's hurt and he probably has the worst current injury of all of them with a torn meniscus.
Yeah, if Kelly Oubre is second on your team in minutes, it just may not be your year.
Yeah. That's more like Wizards-esque, not contender-esque. But enough about the Sixers. Philly fans, our guy Trill out there, we feel for you. We realize how not funny, not comical this season has been. We do not mean to laugh at your expense. But let's talk about the topic du jour in the NBA. I mean, we're recording this on Tuesday. The NBA Cup Final is going to be later tonight. Most people will be watching this after that's decided. We're not going to talk too much about the Cup Final itself between the Thunder and the Bucks. But I did want to get your thoughts on the NBA Cup, the in-season tournament in general. We're 2 years into this thing now. Some people might still be confused about the point differential tiebreakers and all that. But for the most part, I feel like people, players, teams, fans have a handle on what this is, what it's about. And for my money, I'll get into it a bit later. I think it's been a home run. Agree? Disagree?
I think it's a work in progress. I wouldn't say it's a home run yet, but I do think it is good for the league. You are getting some competition that earlier in the season, which they wanted to do when they had this whole idea. They even had a FIFA draw-like ceremony to kind of hype up the groups and who's going to be playing who. I think the problem with that is that they had that in the Summer League in Vegas, so it was nice to kind of hype it up and have that little event. But I think some fans kind of lose track of who's in what group. I think having it on Tuesdays and Fridays to kind of simplify, all right, this is a cup night. You know it. You look at the court. You know what it is. I think that's going to be helpful, but I think people are still kind of figure out in general. And The neutral site for the Final Four, I think that's something they may have to kind of rethink just because the attendance hasn't been great in Vegas.
And even like the fan engagement there, like it's just when there's a lot of neutrals in the crowd, you're never gonna get like a fervent crowd. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, it's tough to kind of obviously you don't know who's gonna be playing on there, so if some team from the West Coast, like the Lakers or the Warriors, you probably see a lot more of their fans go out there just because of proximity. But I think maybe in the future, they might go back to just, even if it's tough for scheduling purposes, just to try to actually have a true home atmosphere where you can get the fans into it. You can give rally towels, T-shirts, all that stuff to kind of hype it up. So I think that's something they might consider down the line.
Yeah, I think there are definitely tweaks to be made. I mean, in fairness to your point about it still being a work in progress, even 2 years in. I think it's been a home run overall, though, in terms of like, yeah, the incentivizing the early season schedule in ways that, like, it's no secret that for a lot of teams, they kind of sleptwalk through the first couple months of the season. We talk about the dog days of the season, December, January. The fact that teams have to be locked in to a certain degree early in the season. The fact that there is something for more teams to compete in early in the season, even teams who don't have championship aspirations, but hey, your team wins a couple games in the cup and it's like, oh, we have a chance to advance and now anything can happen. It creates some meaningful games and minutes for players and teams and fan bases that maybe wouldn't have had them otherwise. The financial incentive helps. I mean, Doc Rivers had made the joke. I think was it after the quarterfinal game or the semifinal game when he said he's never had rookies hug him so tight after a regular season win as they did after one of those wins because, yeah, listen, you win the NBA Cup. It's an extra $500+ grand per player, and even just the difference between being the winning team and the runner-up team, it's like an extra $300,000+ per player. And I know that might not sound like a lot to guys making $50 million a year. But to the guys making around $1 million a year, end of bench guys, rookies, like big difference. So I think that's great. And again, even just making the semifinals, there's a bonus. I believe the quarterfinals there is as well. So like the financial incentive, the extra meaning, I think that's been a home run. I've said from the beginning, I thought that the fact that they were able to bake it into the regular season schedule so that people don't have to worry about like trying to keep track of, oh, this is just a cup game and it's separate from the regular season. It's like, no, it still counts for the regular season standings. It doesn't have to be too confusing. I think you made a good point with the groups, though, and how sometimes people lose track of like who's in what group. I think one change that they should make is just have the groups be the divisions.
Yeah, definitely.
If you're a fan of a team, you already know what division they're in, the teams that are in their division. Make that the cup groups every year. It also increases the, like the local regional rivalries in each division. Divisions are already 6 of groups of 5. It's perfect. Yeah. Just do that. I know you wanted to think outside the box. Keep it simple, stupid.
Like who wouldn't want to see the Knicks and Nets,
right.
go at it?
Yeah, Knicks
Stakes
and Celtics,
are high,
Celtics,
have something
Sixers.
like that on the line. I also think it's a good thing for young teams for the NBA Cup. Like you talk about like establishing a culture. And I think there's kind of a college feel to it. College basketball, they have the early multi-team events. They got the conference tournaments, conference regular season titles where these guys are laying everything out on the line. Like this means something to them. And it's part of kind of the process of like you get a taste of what winning a championship like, whether it be, a small tournament like the Maui Invitational college basketball.
Yeah, exactly.
Or the conference tournament. It gives them a kind of taste of what that is like on top of like that's, part of the path to becoming a national championship program. I think teams like the Thunder and the Rockets, this can be something they can build upon and, part of that culture and just kind of build that progression towards, where they want to be in their end goal of winning a championship.
Yeah, and you can see how much it means to them. Like no one can say that the players don't care about this when you see the way even that Rockets Thunder game was. And I know those are two teams who play hard most nights, but you can't watch that game and tell me those players didn't want that more than they would have wanted a regular December game in the old format, right? And that's why I think this has been a home run, even for like television interest and all that. Any other changes you think to perfect it? Like you mentioned, maybe no more neutral site. I mentioned I think that you just go to divisions, like the divisions for the groups. Any other changes you have in mind?
Yeah, I think the division thing is probably the most simple and effective way to do it. You know who's playing who. You pretty much know who's in your division for the most part. And like you said, early season stakes, bragging rights, regional rivalry. Like I think it's only good.
Yeah.
Good things can come out of that if they were to promote that.
Last thing I'll mention, so Wolfon and I were on the Hello and Welcome podcast with friends of the show here, Will and Alex Wong. I think it was Will who came up with this idea on that episode, but he had come up with an idea that I thought was good where they should have the NBA Cup games. Like keep the schedule the same in terms of how many games they play in the Cup and all that, but instead of it being like certain Tuesdays and Fridays throughout November, but not consistently, they should just block off 3 weeks of the schedule and say during these 3 weeks, this will just be the NBA Cup. So back-to-back Tuesdays, back-to-back Fridays, we knock out the 4 group stage games. The week after that, the knockouts go on. The teams that aren't in the knockouts play each other. Then we do the Vegas. I think that would also simplify it for people if it was just like this 3-week block where those Tuesdays and Fridays, whatever it is, those are Cup games, as opposed to being like, oh, this Tuesday my team's playing a Cup game. Then they don't play one again until like 13 days from now, but they play 4 other games in between. I think that could also help simplify it for people.
Yeah, I think it'd be a pretty good idea. I think I just saw the G League Winter Showcase happens every year. I think they have a bracket setup of 8 teams, and I think it's just over a 3-day stretch. Obviously, the NBA Cup teams can involve everyone.
Yeah.
But having it over a defined period, so like you said, this is when it starts, this is when it ends, keeps things pretty simple. And obviously, if they were to put the divisions, right, I think at that point it'd be a lot easier, and you get more engagement and people who want to buy into it a lot
100%.
more. Instead of looking at it as like, oh, this is just like, a gimmick.
Yeah. All right, we mentioned the Rockets there as one of these like young teams who can maybe use it as a springboard for the rest of the season. Rockets, the team I want to talk about today, they lose to the Thunder in the NBA Cup semifinals, but looking to end a playoff drought this year. Currently 17-9 as I check my notes here. I want to make sure I get this right. As we sit here today, 17-9 with the number 2 defense league-wide. I think they have a lot of depth. They've got quality coaching. The question is, are they ready to contend? Have they arrived? Or do you still see this as a team maybe playing a little bit over their heads right now?
I see them as a team on the rise. They're probably still another year away, maybe one player away from possibly contending, but I do think that they're still, a step away from seriously contending for a championship, especially this season. I think there was some criticism with the way they spent in free agency, spending money on Dylan Brooks, Fred VanVleet, Jock Landale. But I think that was needed for these young guys to kind of develop and kind of learn how to win, honestly. They kind of gone stagnant with Steven Silas the first few years of that rebuild, and they brought in Ime Udoka, a proven guy who has won. It took the Celtics to the finals. And then the vets, they surrounded all those young pieces with guys like leadership. I think during the broadcast, that game against the Thunder, you saw Jeff Green, just giving in-game coaching basically to Jalen Green, telling different things that he's noticing on the floor. So if you can see that in a game, I can't imagine what kind of advice they're getting off the court in practices. All of that is very helpful, and there was a lot of money obviously spent to bring some of these players in, and maybe they're not playing potentially. Like, for example, Fred VanVleet's had a pretty rough season shooting the ball. Maybe they're not playing towards that salary they're in to trying to justify it, but a lot of those monies are going to be off the books. Those contracts are going to be gone. So when they need to kind of, like they've already done with their extensions for Sengun and Jalen Green, they do need to spend to keep some of their younger guys in the future. Those contracts they're movable. They're going to be off the books, and they're going to have some flexibility to work with.
Yeah, I think I'm on board with all that. I think for me, as exciting as this team is, and I don't want to like rain on their parade because they are an exciting team on the rise, playing great, number 2 defense. I do think sometimes we can get into the trap, and like fans can get into the trap where they get so attached to like a young team on the rise, young guys on their own team, and they kind of see it as like, okay, if we just keep these guys together over the next 3 years, okay, like we'll make the playoffs, then we'll make the second round or the conference final, then we'll get to the finals and we'll win. But like, one, development is not always linear, but 2, a lot of times, especially in pro sports, when only one team can win every year out of 30 plus teams, a lot of times forget it, not being linear. It also just is not going to end the way you want it to. Like, you're not going to hit that ultimate ceiling unless you make a move. You move some guys out. And I think what we're seeing with the Rockets is that, in the sense that, like, these guys are a good team, but I still don't think they have, like, a championship level shot creator, offensive initiator, that kind of guy, right? Like, Şengün is great at what he does. Jalen Green, we can have that discussion. But in general, if you look at their offense, you look at the numbers, like, they're a terrible shooting team. They don't turn the ball over, and they crash the offensive glass, and that's really the only reason they're even, like, semi-passable on that end, because they're creating a lot of a lot of second chances, second shots, and also not giving the ball away. Fred VanVleet, usually his teams don't give the ball away. That's the only reason they're even, like, semi-respectable on that end. Otherwise, terrible shooting team, not the kind of team that's, like, creating a lot for themselves, not a lot of efficient looks. Even their three-point attempt ranked 25th. Their overall offensive rating, 18th. Whether it's Jalen Green, whoever, like, do you think there's a guy on this team right now that can be that championship-level shot creator, that they won't have to go out and get that guy? Because I don't. I don't believe in Jalen Green like that, or anyone on that team in that role.
Yeah, I have to agree with you at that point. Like, they are lacking that true number one that if you need a basket, they can give them the ball and you can depend on that person. Whether that they go aggressive in the trade market to try to find that number one, that kind of remains to be seen. But like you said, like, the half-court offense has been a struggle. I think they're 26 per cleaning the glass in their points per 100 possessions. Like, it's not a great look. And so
that's also why they won't win the playoffs, right?
Yeah, game slows down. Yeah. You need to kind of create your own offense. And it also kind of points to, their defense has been great, but they're also kind of relying on being able to create transition opportunities off their defense. And when you're unable to kind of create those turnovers, where's the offense going to come from? And that's kind of the problem with this team right now.
Yeah. Okay, let's have the Jalen Green conversation. I know you don't want to have it, Chicco. I know you're a Jalen Green guy. But look, numbers-wise, if you just look at points per game, you can look at the production. If you catch him on a certain night, watch him on a certain night, see some of the highlights, he has one of those proverbial bags. But if we're talking about impact, contributions to winning, I don't think Jalen Green is that guy. I think the problem with Jalen Green is that he needs the ball to be effective, but he's not a good enough on-ball scorer. He's not an efficient enough ball-dominant guy to justify being the number one guy in a good team. So he's one of those catch-22 guys. Do you agree with that, or do you think I'm being too harsh on him?
I do agree with him needing the ball. So, like, towards the end of last season, we saw him go on this stretch where he was, scoring lots of points, doing an efficient rate, getting it to the free throw line. So, like, over his last 24 appearances, he's averaging 24.5 points, 46% shooting, almost shooting 40% from deep. But a lot of that happened when Şengün was hurt down the stretch. And so, like you said, he had the ball and was able to kind of basically do have control of the offense and kind of do anything he wanted to. The problem now is that, like, can he do the same thing in an off-ball role, or can he kind of coexist with Alperen Şengün? And that's kind of the problem now the Rockets are kind of have on their hands. Like, can they find a way to kind of make things work? And this year, his percentages are down across the board. Yeah, shooting the three, shooting from the field overall. He's not getting to the line as much. For someone with that kind of explosive first step, the athleticism, there's no reason why you shouldn't be getting to the line more. Yep. And that kind of hasn't progressed. This playmaking, like when he was with the Ignite, he was averaging a few assists per game. The popular comp with him at the time was a Bradley Beal, a two scoring guard that could play at the two that also had some playmaking chops. And obviously Bradley Beal, I think over his career, is like averaging roughly five assists per game. He was a pretty steady secondary playmaker, and the thought was
and a much better shooter.
Yeah, and the thought was that Jalen Green may have been able to add that to the game, and he's kind of shown flashes of being a pick and roll playmaker, but he hasn't really built on that. So I think that's kind of like the frustrating part if you're a Rockets fan or Jalen Green fan like myself and a proud Filipino, is that he hasn't taken that next step as a shooter, as a playmaker, and he's still young. He's only 22, but you start to wonder if it's going to happen with the Rockets. Like it's very much still happen elsewhere, but you start to wonder, is it going to be in Houston?
Yeah, this show is quickly becoming how many different cultural groups can we piss off? We had when our guy Michael Chandler, who we work with, we had him here twice. He referred to Giannis as Giannis and referred to Paolo Banchero as Banchero. So we've upset the Greek basketball fans, we've upset the Italian basketball fans, and now with my Jalen Green hate, we've upset Filipino basketball fans. We're equal opportunity haters here. But no, listen, I think like you mentioned the Beal comp. I know a guy people compared him to, not from a play style perspective, but from a player who they thought was underrated on losing teams early in their career. I used to hear the Devin Booker comp a lot, right? Well, like, people hated Devin Booker early in his career because the Suns were losing, and look at him now. Big difference was, and I remember writing about it at the time, early in Booker's career, Devin Booker was always an efficient scorer. Like, that part of his game, like, other than maybe his rookie year, he was always efficient scoring the ball. So you couldn't just say, oh, he's getting his numbers on a bad team because there's no one else there. He was getting his numbers in an efficient way. That works anywhere in basketball. Jalen Green, other than that, quarter season stretch to finish last season, has never been an efficient scorer. And like 3-point shooting, I think he's 31% this year for his career. He's below average. I just don't think he's got an efficient overall skill set. And unless he becomes a better defender, unless he becomes a better off-ball player, a better playmaker, I don't see how he fits as like a starting two guard on a contending team. This brings me to my last Rockets point and question for you as well that we can discuss. They're one of the teams that were rumored to be, potentially a preferred landing spot for Jimmy Butler. He's from Houston. I mentioned on last week's show, I think it would be a really fun landing spot in terms of Jimmy Buckets goes home and like just helps perfect this nasty, tough as hell team that no one wants to play against with Van Vliet and Brooks and all these guys. Do you think the Rockets should even be in those conversations, like looking to expedite things like that with a vet? Or do you think they should just be patient and kind of let things play out, see how they do maybe in the playoffs this year first?
Yeah, it's a tough call. But when you get like an opportunity to potentially land a player Butler's caliber, it's something you have to definitely consider. Like, they probably make a lot of sense in terms of a trade partner. They got young pieces, they got draft assets, expiring contracts. Like, there's a deal to be made there, and it's quite possible they might be able to swing that deal without including one of their young pieces. I mean, it probably might be centered around Dillon Brooks to make the money work, but it's possible that they could definitely swing a deal. Now, in terms of should the Rockets go for it, it's tough because like he's also going to be a free agent, assuming he opts out of his player option at the end of the season. And there's that home narrative, right? If they really want him, like they could go aggressively after him in free agency and kind of work out the rest of the
without having
later.
To give up assets for him. Yeah,
exactly. And I mean, it depends like how much you value maybe guys like Jabari Smith or Amen Thompson. Like, are you going to have to include them in the deal? I mean, do you even include Jalen Green? Like, it's a real conversation they kind of need to have with themselves if they want to make that move. But he does bring a lot of kind of what the Rockets need. Like, we talked about them needing a go-to option, a clutch scorer, a guy to go to down the stretch, someone that can create their own offense. He also can play make and distribute. So, like, that would help solve a lot of problems, especially with their half-court offense stalling the way it is, and he just fits the culture.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think you hit it on the head, though, in terms of, like, they're his hometown team. If they think they're a free agent possibility for him anyway, they'll get creative, find the cap space for him. Then maybe they just sit it out. Because realistically, for as fun as I think Butler and Houston would be immediately, I also don't think it makes them anything close to like a championship favorite. I don't even think it makes them the West favorite. I think the Thunder would still be a lot better than them.
They might win a round, but I wouldn't say they're one player away from being a conference final.
Why give up assets for a guy that maybe pushes you to the second round or something when you have the chance to get that guy, for nothing other than money in the summer if you can create the cap space. All right, we can go from west to east here. A team at the top of or almost at the top of the standings to a team almost at the bottom of the standings. We like to talk Raptors for a few minutes every week. As I've always mentioned, anyone who's coming in to the studio as part of our panel most likely is going to be a Toronto person plugged in with the Raptors. So we like to do our Raps City segment where, in honor of the Six, we try to talk about some sort of Raptors topic in 6 minutes or less. Usually with 3 people, that would be about 2 minutes of airtime each. Sorry, Wolfon, he's not here. 3 minutes for each of us. But let's talk about the Raptors rookies. I wrote about them a couple weeks ago and how the Raptors, one of the many positive things in this otherwise wretched season from a record perspective is, part of this perfect tank is that the Raptors are giving like 4 rookies pretty much rotation minutes, and all have contributed in some way. I mean, we saw Jamal Shed on Monday night in a close loss to Chicago come in the fourth quarter and almost single-handedly win the game for the Raptors. Out of the 4 rookies the Raptors have been giving rotation minutes to, I just mentioned Shed, Jacoby Walter, who was a first-round pick last year, Jonathan Mobo, who's the 31st pick, Jamison Battle, who was out undrafted, Chomsky's in the G League. Not for this exercise, doesn't really count, unless you do think he's got the high ceiling. I don't know. Out of the 5 Raptors rookies, the 4 getting minutes this year, who do you think is going to be the best player long-term? Like the true keeper among these 5?
Yeah, it kind of sounds very obvious, but I'm going with the first-round pick, Jacoby Walter. The efficiency, that's definitely something that's, you'd like to see him be a more efficient shooter and shoot the 3 a lot better, but the flashes are there of the type of player that the Raptors are hoping he becomes. A guy that can space the floor, shoot the 3, and also provide some good defense. Like, he works very hard off the ball, on the ball, defender. Like, he's got a high motor. He's got the length. I think he's got a 6'10" wingspan. Yeah. So I don't think there's going to be any issues there. Like, he's had that when he was at Baylor. He's shown that during his brief time in the league. So I think that's going to be there. The shooting, hopefully that kind of progresses with some time, but he did show that in Baylor as well. He was 7th in the Big 12. He made 75 threes last season. So it's not like he doesn't have the range. Obviously, it's a lot closer to the three-point line in the college game, but he definitely has the three-point range to kind of have that, to be that 3-and-D guy that this team needs. And he missed training camp.
Yeah.
We can't forget about that. You miss training camp. It's tough enough when you're an NBA rookie, but missing entire training camp, coming back mid-season, trying to get acclimated to the playbook, how the team plays, be on the same page as your teammates, that's difficult. And so he's kind of been playing catch-up from the get-go, and I'm sure that definitely has contributed to some early struggles shooting the ball, but I think he's already shown flashes of what they hope that he could potentially become down the line.
Yeah, I think the defensive length and activity on the ball. Like I think he's got a really high ceiling on the defensive end. I've honestly been impressed. Like you mentioned, him missing all the time, missing training camp. Then he also re-injured that same shoulder after he came back, missed more time. So, rookies are usually disasters defensively. They're usually net negatives. And on the whole, yes, Walter has been. But I think he's looked a lot more comfortable and NBA ready than I would have envisioned if someone had told me he's going to miss all of training camp and then miss another couple weeks after he comes back. And the thing that it's impressed me is some of the off-the-dribble juice he's shown the last couple weeks where he is creating for himself, and it's not the most efficient, but he's shooting 50% inside the arc, 71% plus from the free throw line. I don't think he's necessarily going to be a bad shooter. And if that shooting comes along, if the range comes with his off-the-dribble and pull-up abilities and the defensive abilities, the Raptors might have found something here as a two-way guard. I know, we'll give Wolfon a shout-out. He was thinking Walter, when he found out one of us was going to take Walter, he was going to talk a little bit about Jonathan Mobo. The one thing I'll say with Mobo, I love watching the guy play. He's just a ball of energy. His second jump, talent evaluator scouts often talk about second jump. So you jump up for a rebound, but then that second leap, I swear to you, a lot of times it looks like Mobo's getting up for his second jump while most guys are coming down from their first. He's just so explosive and quick. Elite offensive rebounder. Great defender, switchable defender. I think there's always going to be a place for a versatile defensive big who's an elite rebounder, elite offensive rebounder.
You can never have enough of that.
Exactly. Honestly. Yeah, I think he'll be a good rotation player for a long time. Walter, I do agree, though, is probably going to be the best overall player. The other guy I just want to shout out quickly is Jamison Battle. Undrafted. This guy just knows how to play. He's a smart player. Unbelievable shooter. He leads all rookies in three-point shooting. I believe last I checked, he was 19th league-wide in three-point shooting among
pretty crazy
273
limited minutes
or whatever it is. Yeah, qualified shooter, something like that. Anyway, he's also, I checked, highest rookie three-point percentage ever, in a season ever. Anthony Morrow, 46.7% was first. Drazen Petrovic, 35 years ago, second at 45.9%. Jamison Battle right now, 44%, the third highest rookie three-point shooting percentage ever.
That's some company.
It is. And I know, look, like Steph's fifth on that list. I know the volume is much different there, and so that's more impressive. But still, for an undrafted guy to look as comfortable as he has on an NBA court, to play pretty mistake-free basketball the way he has, to be an elite shooter, really good movement shooter. He's already perfected the art that like every great shooter has, where, you know, like the fly by, letting a defender fly by, calmly waiting to like reset, shoot it, the sidestep threes. He's got all that. I think he's gonna be an elite shooter, and he's also shown me some stuff. The few times he's attacked closeouts and put the ball on the floor, I think he's crafty. Defensively, I think he's just smart enough to hold his own. I don't think he'll be the best Raptors rookie, but I think the fact that he even looks like he's going to be a solid rotation player going forward, if they got that guy undrafted, that's a win for this front office.
Yeah, and you could never have enough shooting, especially in today's NBA. And like you said, to be able to get a guy that was undrafted, you know, earned his spot on the way in the team, and he could be a contributor down the line, especially with the stuff with the apron and first or second apron and triggering all that and the all penalties that come with that. It's valuable to kind of find guys with value in today's NBA.
No, that's a great point. Like getting guys on these like cost-controlled rookie scale contracts in the apron world is very big in terms of building out, you know, how you're going to build out your roster and the ability to build out your roster as you do become a contending team. Great point. Nothing but great points from Chicco today. I'm also biased because he gave me the slow clap after my monologue, after I complimented it.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Always appreciate you coming on, man. Thanks for helping me carry this as a two-man show today, two-man panel.
Shaq and Kobe.
Yes, love it. We'll have you on again sometime in the new year. For now, though, I want to head to Indiana and talk a little Pacers. Scott Agness covers the Indiana Pacers and the Indiana Fever over at Fieldhouse Files. Scott, thanks for joining us, man. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I've actually been wanting to get you on the show for a while because, you know, the Pacers, one of the teams we've all been watching throughout the season and been a little maybe perplexed at some of their early season struggles. I saw them up close and personal twice in Toronto already this season, and both times just came away feeling like they were so lifeless and listless and kind of out of sync. And it seems so different than what I remembered, you know, watching the Pacers last year, especially early in the season. I mean, a year ago, they were in the NBA Cup Finals. So, you know, then they trade for Siakam. They marched to the Eastern Conference Final. Right now, they're 12-15. You're someone who's as plugged in and, you know, as watching this team as intently as anyone. What is the biggest difference to you from, you know, what this team was a year ago, even 6 months ago in the playoffs, to what they are right now?
Yeah, so there's been a lot go on, obviously, and you're totally right about your feel for what's going on. That something's off, because it clearly is. I think it's a combination of factors. First of all, you can go back to where this team was a year ago at this time, and they were playing in the finals for the inaugural NBA Cup. Well, back then it was a different team. You didn't have Siakam. You had Buddy Hield, which has kind of been Tyrese's Haliburton's safety net. He's been with him his entire career. He helps open things up, helps with spacing, helps with ghost screens out on the court and all those different things. Well, Buddy was about to hit free agency, so he wanted to be moved and traded to a team with a greater opportunity. Before that, they moved on from Bruce Brown, who's a good defender with experience, who can shoot the outside ball. So that kind of sets the stages for the difference. Now, they still got to the conference finals, but they certainly took advantage of teams being in bad health. Giannis, I don't think, even played in the playoffs, for example, because of bad health, and several other teams as well. Now, the Pacers weren't perfect either. They got Benedict Mathurin back this season after he needed season-ending shoulder surgery. But even going back to preseason, man, this team it's kind of going through the motions. I did not think it was a good preseason. Now, sometimes that doesn't much matter, but I thought it was a direct reflection of then what we saw to start the regular season. And then Tyrese never really had a true offseason, by the way. For the second summer in a row. He played for the World Cup team 2 years ago. He played or was with the Olympic team this past year. He had a hamstring injury, then re-injured it in the playoffs, then suffered two additional injuries over the summer that were kind of quiet. So he never really had an off season, or at least a healthy one. Then you get to training camp, a little bit different team. Siakam had meshed within this group, but he and Mathurin kind of play a very different playing style than the rest of the group. On top of that, and I could keep going, but the Pacers have all these injuries with Wiseman and Isaiah Jackson suffering season-ending Achilles tendon injuries within 10 days apart. You just don't see that very often. And then they've had a couple other Three of their top wing defenders have all been hurt. So a combination of those factors have led them to where they are today.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like, you know, when you go from NBA Cup finalists and Eastern Conference finalists to where they are now, it takes more than one thing. Like, a lot of things kind of have to go a little off the rails. But I think we'd probably, you know, both agree that the biggest factor or the most important piece of this team, the most valuable player, is by far Tyrese Haliburton. How much of this, you know, as much as all those factors are, you know, are taken into account, how much is this just that, you know, listen, like the way this team was built, if Tyrese Haliburton isn't like a generational offensive star, which he is at his best, and, you know, an elite shooter and all that, that the team is just so bad defensively. Haliburton himself, you know, is bad enough defensively where if he's not that like generational offensive star, this team just isn't good enough.
Yeah, you really need them to be an elite offensive team in order to offset their horrible defense. You're right. They're 29th in defensive rating. It hasn't just been bad or poor. It's been horrendous, just like it was basically a year ago. And about this time, I think it was December 19th, after giving up like 150 points to the LA Clippers, they kind of reassessed where they were defensively. So you're spot on there. A lot of this hinges on what they're doing or not doing, maybe you say, defensively. And the other big thing in the bigger picture and all this we should mention is how the game's officiated now. Really going back to All-Star break. I remember it was right here in Indianapolis where Adam Silver was being asked about the scoring and whether they should do anything about it and how things might change. Well, we saw it. They allowed more physicality. Free throw rate decreased. Well, guess who that immediately hurts? The Pacers, who want to play fast. They want to get up and down the floor. They want to have fast break and transition points. And more to that, into your point, is officiating. They're allowing you to be tighter and closer with guys. So Tyrese is really getting hounded out there. He's being surrounded, and pressure's up in his grill from like half court on. And so it's been physical for him, and it's physically taxing for him to try to just get away from the pressure to try to run the offense. So that's why it's a big deal that off guard Andrew Nembhard's back in the lineup after injuries. He can really help handle the ball in more situations and open things up.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think that's something that not enough or a lot of people are talking about with respect to the Pacers, especially is how things have changed because of the officiating changes. But one guy connected to the Pacers who has not been shy to talk about that is head coach Rick Carlisle. And the reason I know that is because before their second game, I think, in Toronto, in his pregame media availability, this was not like postgame where he was complaining about the officials that night. Pregame, he ended up going off on a couple tangents about how unfair he thinks the officiating has been to his team and to Tyrese Haliburton specifically, and even mentioned at one point that it feels like to him guys are trying to hurt Tyrese Haliburton. I mean, obviously a bit of hyperbole. Coaches always, you know, delve into that kind of stuff, but the way he views it is it seemed like guys were trying to hurt Tyrese Haliburton and just getting away with it. Do you, like, again, I know coaches are biased. Do you get any of that sense where the officiating has been unfair to Haliburton in any way, or do you just think this is an adjustment for everyone and he hasn't quite gotten there yet?
I think it's the new normal, at least for right now. And so, yes, it requires an adjustment, and it requires adjustment of everyone, because if they're taking away Tyrese Haliburton, you got to make do with everything else. Because you're exactly right. This team was built with Tyrese, his pace, his speed, his vision, all that in mind. So if you remove him for the equation or you severely limit him, you're really taking away the Pacers' superpower. And that's really what we have seen. I haven't looked at it recently, but I feel like the Pacers were like 21st in pace or something to that extent, which is not at all what they are. They don't need to be 1 or 2 like they were last year with Boston, but they need to be probably top 8, top 5 to be exactly who they are, with Obi Toppin running the floor, with other guys filling in on the wing. You knock down outside shots. The weird thing in all this is the team differentials and Tyrese's differentials. Maybe they run in hand in home games and in road games. They're one of the best three-point shooting teams in home games, not one of the best ones on the road. Tyrese's splits, they've improved a little bit. This upcoming stretch here over the next 3 weeks or so is going to give us a better, more consistent vision for what he is and how he's playing right now. Because, yes, he's played much better over the last week or two, but lighter opponents, home-heavy schedule. We'll see if it can translate when you're going to Phoenix, when you're going to Golden State, and when he returns to Sacramento like they do this week.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that schedule. So they're in Phoenix, in Sacramento, at Golden State, come home to play the Thunder, go to Boston for 2 games, home to play Milwaukee.
Yeah.
then to Miami, home to play Phoenix, and then I guess you could say they get a bit of a break by playing the Nets and Bulls, but then again, after that, Golden State, Cleveland. Like, these next 4 weeks, that is a brutal, unforgiving schedule for the best of teams, let alone a team that, does look a little out of character, is struggling. And I know I keep harping on it here with Haliburton, but like I remember last year when I was writing a feature about Haliburton early in the year and how awesome the Pacers offense was. And in kind of prepping for that feature, I don't remember who it was. One of the Pacers role players at the end of a Pacers broadcast after Haliburton had just had this big game and they had won. And this player said on the broadcast kind of something along the lines of like, as long as we have Tyrese, everything's okay. Or like, as long as we have, Tyrese, everything's good. And it is just interesting to see a year later where it's like, it's so true, but they don't quite have that version of Tyrese. How simplistic is it, do you think, to point to last year, that hamstring injury, and the fact that, look, he did pretty much admit that he did try to come back a little earlier to play through it to qualify for the All-NBA team, right? To hit that 65-game minimum. That's one of my issues with that rule, is that it could create situations like this. Is it low-hanging fruit for those of us outside of Indiana to say that's the root of all this? Like, the fact he hasn't looked fully himself since then probably all stems to him trying to play through that? Or do you think there's a lot more going on than that?
Yeah, I think that's the simplified version, is that health and not having a healthy offseason. I think it basically goes back to him playing continuously, not this last July, but the previous July, right? So you're traveling the world with the World Cup team. You come back, have a challenging schedule with the Pacers, includes the NBA Cup. We could even go back to last February when he was basically Mr. Mayor here in Indianapolis. So he doesn't get an all-star break. That's a little thing that adds up in the big picture. Does not. He was doing a podcast interview. He was hosting an indie event on Thursday. He was attending each of the events. He played in the all-star game. So he had all of that. Then the Pacers went out on the road. He celebrated a birthday, by the way, during that stretch, so that never helps either. I think he was like 23, so he celebrated appropriately. Yeah. Then it's one thing after another. He's flying under the radar. But to your point, I think the number one thing is the continuous schedule has not allowed for that injury and whatever else is plaguing him to fully heal. Thus, in turn, he hasn't had time to work on himself, hadn't had time to maybe adjust to certain things or work on a new move, because it's been about rehab rather than progression.
I know I was checking like the last 10 games or so, the 3-point percentage is up over 40% again. Do you think, at least from a shooting perspective, he's back to being Tyrese Haliburton and things should continue to trend upwards? Or are you still worried about whatever it was that was plaguing his jumper early in the year?
Yeah, I want to see more. As I was kind of referencing earlier, it's been a lighter schedule, and I think they've been in a home-friendly schedule. Well, now he's got to do it on the road against some of the top opponents in the league. So it's certainly been positive. It's been more of what we expect from him, but I'm not ready to say, hey, he's back or he's solved that or anything like that until maybe a couple more weeks when we see what he can do in this upcoming stretch that's going to be vicious.
Just a couple more for you before we let you go. I wanted to touch quickly on the Pacers did make one of the few in-season trades that have happened so far this season. They traded for Thomas Bryant. You had mentioned some of the big men that were hurt already. They bring in Thomas Bryant, some reinforcements there. I know it's super early, very small sample size. What were your impressions of that trade and what you've seen from Bryant so far?
Yeah, so again, Jackson and Wiseman out for the season essentially with Achilles tendon surgery. So that's a brutal blow. And so what's unusual about it is this team had been overstocked with centers probably for the last 5 or 6 years. Pacer fans will tell you all the time they remember the days when you had Domantas Sabonis and Miles Turner both kind of playing out of position because you were figuring out a way to start 2 centers. Yeah. And Miles Turner's still around. He's in year 10, but you don't have a true backup. They tried Moses Brown out of the G League. That was after 3 weeks of doing nothing. That didn't exactly work. He doesn't exactly fit their style. They wanted more. So you got to address that in the trade market. They had to wait till this December 15th, and then they were the first ones to come through with a deal. I like the fit with Thomas Bryant. First of all, they did receive the disabled player exception, which allows some cap relief, but they are right up against the luxury tax. I'm talking hundreds of thousands, and it would be foolish for ownership in the front office right now, which is not a championship contending roster, to play in the luxury tax. You just set the team back, more so in the future if you pay the repeater tax. So you get Thomas Bryant. He's in the final year of his contract, a prorated veteran minimum. He's a guy, by the way, who's from played college ball just down the road, an hour away at Indiana University. So like Victor Oladipo previously, there's a built-in fan base, a built-in comfort, a built-in appreciation for him. And what have we seen this team miss is some energy, some life to him. And Thomas is an emotional player. He's an energetic player. And so I think he helps solve that as a nice backup center who, by the way, was seeking a greater role than he was presently getting down with the Miami Heat.
Yeah, it does seem like a kind of perfect marriage in terms of a team and player that need each other at this point in the season. Last thing before we go, I wanted to get your take on, because I know you wrote about it, the Pacers striking this TV deal with a local broadcaster. You know, for a lot of people who maybe aren't paying attention to every team in the league, they might not realize, and I know it's not just specific to the NBA, it happened in baseball, and with a lot of these regional networks going under, teams lost their regional broadcast rights. And so for some teams and fans of teams, it's not as easy as just watching all 82 games. For those of us who aren't as plugged in with that situation, can you explain to us what is going on with the Pacers regional TV situation and also the latest update on it?
Yeah, so it's really, we're all at a crossroads, I think, with it. Like, do you have streaming? Do you have cable? What channels do you get? For example, I have streaming, so you don't get the regional network that the Pacers air on. You cannot watch those games. I sit back and wonder, in a big picture, over the last half dozen years, how many 8-year-old boys and girls, how many 12-year-olds have grown up unable to even watch the Pacers play, for example, because either mom and dad don't want to pay for cable or can't afford it, or it's just not worth it. They haven't been quite good enough. Whatever the reason is, they haven't grown up with it. So instead, guess what they're watching? If it's early enough, by the way, because I hate how the games are so late for these individuals, but they're watching LeBron. They're watching Steph. They're watching Ja Morant, maybe a little Anthony Edwards now, and you have more affiliation. You talk to these kids anymore. It's about individuals. It's less about teams like I'm sure you or myself grew up with. It was your hometown team, and you were you bled their colors or whatever, right, for those teams. And so you're seeing new ownership, which is interesting, kind of go away from the regional sports network model. So Matt Ishbia in Phoenix, Ryan Smith in Utah, they said, let's get out of our regional sports deal. We're going to create an app. We're going to create or we're going to put it over the air, which means if you just have an antenna that you can probably get for free, or if not like $10, you can receive that channel, high definition, no big deal. So it makes it a lot more accessible, which helps with marketing of your team. So the point of my story here is Diamond Sports Group, which owns the regional sports network, now known as FanDuel Sports Network. They updated their terms with the 13 teams that they have pre-existing deals with for this season. They updated those terms because they reduced the money that they were providing because they're in bankruptcy court or have been. And so that allows for these teams to show it up to 5 games in a simulcast. So it'll still air on the sports network, but the Pacers will bring it local. They're going to air it on their NBC affiliate for 5 games coming up, which will be an interesting data point. I think you'll expand your marketability, and you'll see how much more of an audience you're reaching for maybe future considerations as well. So I think it's a win-win deal for just about everybody, and it's something definitely to keep an eye on in this new media environment.
Yeah, that's an awesome development, and I you were touching on it, but I just think it's really important going forward that we make sure every team, small market teams especially, have a way to connect with the next generation and have a generation of kids coming up watching their games, feeling engaged with their games. Because I couldn't imagine. I remember as a kid, a sports obsessed kid, I couldn't imagine even here in Toronto, like not being able to watch my local teams for various reasons or not having that option. It's tough to make a connection with that next generation. And for as great as it is that kids are NBA fans, not just a team fan, you also want them connected to their local teams. That's how you keep these franchises strong going forward. So
how many kids are just watching NBA highlights on YouTube?
A lot.
I would guess more than 50%, if not like 80%.
Yep.
That's probably the biggest development. Is at some point, does the NBA have to realize we need to start offering less on those other platforms to get them to tune into the game, or else they're just going to watch a 10-minute highlight package, get the best of everything, and get on to their next TV program or whatever it is. So it's a big concern here, and that's why I think in large part the NFL has been so successful here in the U.S. is it's scheduled. It's basically every Sunday. Now there are Monday, Thursday, whatever, and it's all over the-air television. So there are no barriers to try to watch your football team.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's funny because there's a lot of kids who probably, they see the highlights of games. They could see the best highlights and they know those highlights and they know the players creating them. And if you ask them, who won that game from that highlight? I don't know.
It doesn't matter. Did you see that dunk, though?
Exactly. Yeah, definitely a different time. Scott, we really appreciate your time and helping us break down everything Pacers here and everything going on there with Indiana basketball. Definitely would like to have you back on the show next time we want to talk Pacers.
Yep, very good. Good to be on with you here.
Big thanks to Scott Agness for joining us, talking Pacers with us. Thanks to Chicco Nacion joining us in studio today. Thanks, as always, to Zach and Adrian in the control room, and to all of you for watching. My name is Joseph Casciaro. This has been The Unfiltered Show. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.